Hello, welcome to Conway Video. I thought I would do an episode 2 on documentation, specifically my tips and ideas about what constitutes good documentation or how to go about documentation and what's kind of worked in my experience in the realm of documentation. So without further ado, what are the tips I want to share? And I'm really keen to hear what other people think are good ideas and tips. So please feel free to chime in if you wish to. So tip number one main concept per article. So anywhere that you write documentation, you're probably going to be able to split things up into articles or pages or whatever you call it. I'm just going to call it articles for now. So the documentation is basically a set of articles. Each article should have at the top in the title one main concept that article talks about. So, and then the whole article should be around that concept, and the title should express the concept in the simplest, clearest language possible. And that's I think a good way to do to break things up. Each article should have one focus, and that just makes the documentation easier to read, because the person who's reading the documentation is probably going to understand what it means and find it more useful if they can just focus on one thing at a time, right? You want them to be able to focus on one thing at a time and not be constantly trying to keep 100 different things juggling inside their heads. So you don't want to introduce 2 concepts or 3 concepts or 4 concepts. No, one concept per article. You can refer to other concepts, you can link to other articles, you can mention other things, but the general kind of direction and premise of the article should be one concept. That should be the thing that really the whole document or the whole article is about. So that's my first tip. The second tip, following very closely from the first tip, is keep it short. The document should be short because people have limited attention spans, and it's easier for people to read something if it's short and they feel it's digestible. A lot of people don't have the patience to read pages and pages and pages. People do have the patience to read one screen full. If you can try and fit it on one screen, really good. Even better if you can fit it on like a small screen, like a MacBook Air or something, even better. If you can fit it like on one phone screen, like you're winning. That's a really, really short article. Obviously, you don't want to go extreme and have like a 3-word article, right? We're not trying to do haiku or something here, right? But we're trying to explain stuff. But yeah, I think short concepts, short one concept articles are good. So keep the article as short as possible. If you find that you're writing pages and pages and it's starting to turn into a monstrosity, simply break it up, right? Split it into another concept. Chances are that concept that article is about, it's probably such a deep concept that there are actually multiple sub-concepts. And so what you really need to be doing is writing other articles about those other concepts and then linking to those articles from the first article. So you can always put in links, but I would say always like keep each article then as short as possible so that people actually feel comfortable and confident in reading it and they don't get bored to death. Now my third tip, use every possible name of the concept in the same breath or the same article as you explain the concept. So if you're doing an article that is about, what's a good example? Let's just say you're doing an article about text editors, right? And then in the company, people use 3 different text editors. They use Sublime Text, they use Visual Studio Code, and they use WebStorm. So those are the 3 IDE/text editors that people use. So use all of those 3 words in the same article as text editors, right? So you've got the heading that should say text editors. Inside the body of the article somewhere, find a place where you can put those keywords: Sublime, Visual Studio Code, WebStorm. And there's 2 reasons that you should do that. One is that if you use all the words of a concept or all the different sort of alternative words that are used to describe a concept, then when a person reads your article, they will learn a lot more. They will understand, oh, okay, when people talk about text editors, they're also talking about Visual Studio Code, they're also talking about Sublime Text, they're also talking about yada, 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 right? Or it's the same with financial concepts or whatever concepts that your company or your business deals with. people are going to look at the article, they'll learn about the main concept and the main name that you give it, but they'll also learn all the other names that people use to describe that thing. Language is a very complicated thing, right? People can use different words to describe the same thing. So if you have all those words in one article, the person reading the article is going to end up being more informed because they'll understand all the different meanings of all those words. They won't just understand that one word that you used. The second reason is search. People are going to search for your information in your documentation, in your wiki or whatever you use. You want them to find what they're searching for. How are they going to find it if those words aren't used? If they're searching for Sublime and they don't get any results because all the information about Sublime is in an article called text editors and it doesn't actually use that word, they're not going to find what they're looking for. So you have to use the words that people are going to be looking for. It's just like Google or SEO, right? If you want your site to come up on Google, you have to use the right keywords so that people are going to search for those keywords and find them. Or your CV, right? If you're editing your CV, you need to use the right keywords in your CV so that the people who are looking to find a talented person who has those skills, they're going to find your CV because you use those words. So I think it's the same with documentation. Use every word that you need to. Fourth tip, collaborate. Make it a team effort. Get more than one person involved. Firstly, the only way that anyone's going to even know that there is documentation is if someone tells them. And so the more people are telling them, then the better. And so therefore you want as many people as possible to be helping you, working with you on the documentation. Another reason, if those other people are going to check your work. So if you're writing something and it doesn't make sense, no one's going to know unless someone else gives feedback. So preferably the person who gives you feedback is the person is working with you as you build the documentation, as you write it. They shouldn't be coming in like days or months or weeks later and saying, I don't understand what this thing means. This is nuts. They should be coming in very early on as you're writing it. They should be pointing out the errors and the mistakes you're making, and you should have a chance to fix those errors and mistakes. And that means the documentation will be better quality, and that means that the people later coming in who need to see that stuff will be able to find it and understand it. So I'd say, yeah, collaborate. Fifth, if more than one person asks about something, then make it a document. It shouldn't even be a question mark. You shouldn't even think about it. If more than one person asks you about one thing, don't even hesitate. Just make an article about it. The fact that more than one person, that two people wondered about this thing, is already enough evidence that this thing is something that people in future could ask a lot about. And you don't know what people are going to be interested in. But if two people are interested in something, there's a good chance that more and more people are going to be interested in it. So as soon as you get two people asking you about the same thing, just make a document, make an article. It shouldn't be too hard. Just make one title and maybe just one short paragraph describing the thing, and that's it. Leave it at that. And if you need to write more, obviously you can write more and expand it more. But even just a very single title and a short article based on the question and the answer to the question is already helping a lot. So 6, where are we up to? I think we're up to 6. So my 6th tip is use lots of examples where you can. So use an example of something in the document. Don't just talk about, well, here is our customer screen and here is where you can add and delete contacts within that customer, but actually show an example. Show a screenshot if you can, and show a real example of a real customer. Or maybe if you're worried about privacy, okay, it can be a fake customer, but show an example of a fake customer then, right? Show a real fake customer, if that makes any sense. So yeah, show some real or realistic examples in your documentation so people look at them and kind of know what you're talking about. And that leads me to the next one, which is screenshots. Use screenshots. So take a screenshot of what you're talking about. Don't just say, well, we have this screen here and we have this button here and there's this drop down, you can choose this and that. Actually show a screenshot of it. That visually can really help people to understand. People remember a picture sometimes a lot better than they remember a lot of text. And it's just nicer to look at too. It's nice to see examples of things. People don't want to have to, work out what some paragraph of text means in their heads. They'd rather just see a picture of it and then they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Diagrams, that's another example. So I think we're up to 8 by now or something, but yeah, diagrams. Use diagrams. It could be a really simple diagram. It can be just one box with an arrow pointing to another box. Diagrams don't have to be complicated. They don't have to look clever. Diagrams can be very, very simple, and all it has to show is one thing pointing to another thing, or maybe one thing pointing to 2 other things. Just a very simple diagram to just really visually illustrate how something works. If you want to have a diagram that shows that an email has to first be approved by comms, and then it has to be approved by PR, and then we can send it to the public. All you need is a simple diagram with 3 boxes, right? It just has to show comms, PR, public, and just an arrow going from one to the other. That's actually a really simple diagram, and you spend like 2 minutes doing that diagram. That could save someone else, that could save a lot of hours actually when a lot of people start to ask that question. They can just look at that diagram and they get the idea immediately. Okay, ninth tip. Getting close to 10 now. Ninth tip is read-write controls. Don't put heavy controls on your documentation. Okay, like maybe you do need to if it's a sensitive part of the business and you want to be careful about privacy and you want to be careful about security and stuff like that. But at least within the business, I just don't see any point in putting write controls on things. Honestly, this isn't the 90s anymore. We don't use visual source safe. We don't have a check-in process where you have to get approval from higher up managers before you put code into like a repository. Just be done with it, right? Hands off. Just let people jump in there and contribute. You want people to be involved in the documentation. You don't want to be shooing them away with things that say you're not allowed to edit this, you're not allowed to delete this, you're not allowed to add this. That's just the wrong approach. I mean, unless there's some reason that you need it to be locked down. I know in some companies maybe having things locked down kind of works for them. So I guess your mileage may vary, but if you just want to make documentation so things are clearer and people stop asking you questions all the time, why would you make it locked down and read only and all that stuff? Just don't. Just open it up, let anyone edit, contribute. You'd be amazed how well most people behave when you do it that way. And if there's the odd person who, I don't know, messes things up a bit, then maybe you can kind of just put write controls on that one person. Okay, I think we've gotten to 10 now. So 10 is link to the documentation from outside. So you can send someone a link in the chat room. You can put a link in a task in, say, like a Jira task or a ticket or whatever system you use. I'd be a little bit careful about linking to it from code because code can change and so can documentation, but anything that is kind of very time-based, like a task or a chat message, I think you're safe to link to documentation from there. Or slides as well. If you need to link to it from a slide in a slide deck, link to it there as well. Those sorts of things are kind of temporary, and that people are going to be looking at them at the same time as they're looking at the docs. So then you don't have to worry about documentation being out of date or the link being out of date because it's all happening at the same time. Code, I'd be a little bit more careful about linking to things in code because code can be there for a lot longer than the docs. So by the time someone comes back to the code in 3 years' time, that link might still be there and the documentation might not be there. So yeah, I'd be careful, but I think generally linking to documentation from chat messages, from tasks, I mean, that's great. That basically gets the word out, people can see it, and then it saves everyone a lot of time and hassle because they can refer to the docs instead of asking you all the questions all the time. So that's my little spiel on documentation. Those are my 10 tips. All the best and good luck with your documentation efforts.